When I was 18 years old, I felt like I was on the brink of a new and exciting phase in my life. I had just graduated from high school, and my dreams revolved around going to college and entering the workforce. However, things didn't go as I had hoped. Enrolling in college turned out to be a real challenge, along with the difficulty of finding a job in my area. These challenges left me feeling frustrated and anxious. Due to these circumstances, I decided to go to the job center, where I thought I might find some assistance. Upon my arrival, the staff there informed me that my shyness was the main barrier hindering me during job interviews. It wasn't easy for me to confront this issue, so they decided to include me in a group aimed at teaching interview skills. Unfortunately, this group was far from what I expected. I felt it was a waste of time and that I might have been placed in the wrong group, or that they had simply added me to increase numbers. The group consisted of older men, all at least 4 decades older than me. We didn't have much in common, and I felt uncomfortable talking to them. Among these men was one, whom I will call John, since I can no longer remember his real name. From the very first moment he walked in, he seemed to annoy everyone. During the instructor's introduction, John interrupted to complain about how useless the course was for him, emphasizing that he was about to retire and that no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over 10 years in prison. He didn't stop there. He shocked everyone when he claimed that he was convicted for beating his ex-wife. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He also insisted that his ex-wife was lying and that she didn't even have bruises during the trial. I felt uncomfortable because I realized it was unlikely that someone would receive over 10 years for an alleged assault that supposedly never happened. It was clear that John wasn't telling the whole truth, which made me decide to avoid him from that moment on. As time passed, I didn't interact much with the other men in the group either, as we didn't have much to talk about due to the age gap. I spent my lunch breaks alone in the library while the others headed to the pub. No one ever asked me where I was going during breaks, and since the pub and library were in completely different directions, it was hard for anyone to know where I was headed. Things took a strange turn about halfway through the course. One day, I ran into an old friend during my lunch break and decided to catch up with them instead of heading to the library. After our brief chat, I finally made my way to the library, where I spent about 15 minutes before borrowing some books. While I was chatting with the librarian about an upcoming movie related to the books I was borrowing, I suddenly felt hands gripping my shoulders. I hate being touched without warning, so I immediately pushed the hands away and turned around, backing into the librarian's desk. To my shock, it was John. He stood there smiling and made a joke about how he knew he would find me there since I practically lived in the library. This added more confusion to an already uncomfortable situation. There was no way for him to know I would be there unless he had been watching me during previous breaks. I hadn't even been to the library that day, so how could he possibly know I would go there after the session? The librarian, noticing my discomfort, asked if I knew John. When I briefly explained the situation, he politely asked John to leave me alone or exit the building. However, John refused, claiming we were friends despite my protests to the contrary. After some back and forth, John agreed to leave, but stationed himself right outside the doors, clearly waiting for me. The librarian, visibly concerned, suggested I stay inside until his shift was over so he could walk me to my bus stop. Unfortunately, I had another meeting that evening and couldn't wait, so I had to leave. As soon as I stepped outside, John immediately invaded my personal space again, joking about the librarian's problem and acting as though we were close friends. When I tried to walk around him, he grabbed my arm and insisted we go to a closer bus stop together, claiming we both took the same bus. This was news to me, as I had never seen him on my bus before. Reluctantly, I agreed, fearing he might follow me down the dark alleys if I tried to walk away. At the bus stop, John continued to act overly familiar, even suggesting we go for coffee together. I firmly told him no, but he kept pushing, eventually inviting me to his flat. His conversation became even stranger when he mentioned that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we arrived, I shouldn't worry, it was just his 18-year-old daughter. At this point, other people at the stop were staring, and I used the attention to firmly tell John I didn't want to go to his flat and to leave me alone. Thankfully, the bus arrived just then. I quickly got on, hoping for some safety, but John followed me and physically shoved me into the window seat, trapping me against the side of the bus. I loudly demanded he move and leave me alone, but he ignored me, continuing to invade my space and trying to convince me to visit his flat. Although a few passengers gave me uncomfortable glances, no one intervened, even when I shouted at him to stop touching me. He finally stopped after I made a scene, but continued to talk about his apartment. When we neared his stop, John pointed out his building and tried to give me a kiss on the cheek, which I dodged. He then waved at me through the bus window as it pulled away. Shaken and upset, I emailed the course instructor that evening, explaining what had happened and requesting to be moved to another group. Despite reading my email, she ignored it for an entire week until I threatened to involve the police. Her response was to allow me to leave the course early, essentially kicking me out instead of addressing the real issue. I bumped into John once more after that, and he tried to ask why I hadn't been attending the group anymore, admitting that he'd asked the instructor, but they refused to tell him. Thankfully, I managed to lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few times in passing over the years, but he's never noticed me or tried to approach me again. I hope it stays that way. A few years ago, I was driving home when I had a strange experience. At the time, I was 23 years old, and I had just dropped my dad off at the airport for a late flight. After saying goodbye, I felt relieved to start my long journey home. It was already dark outside, and I still had 3 hours of driving ahead of me. The trip started normally, but after a couple of hours, my GPS recalculated my route and took me down a winding backroad highway. It was an eerie drive. There were no other cars on the road, just darkness surrounding me. As I turned around a curve, a black car suddenly appeared out of nowhere, tailgating me closely. My heart began to race as I felt increasingly uneasy. Then, just as I was processing the situation, I saw blue lights flashing behind me. Realizing that I needed to find a safe place to pull over, I continued driving until I reached a spot with a few small lights. It was difficult to stop in such darkness. When I finally pulled over, an officer approached my window. He asked if I knew my car's tags were expired. I was caught off guard because I was driving my mom's car, and she is usually very organized about those things. What really unsettled me was how quickly he spoke, as if he were in a rush. Before I even had the chance to show him my license and registration, his radio beeped. He quickly mentioned he had to respond to another call, rushed back to his car, and sped off. I sat there feeling a mix of relief for not getting a ticket, but also shaken by how odd the whole encounter had felt. I resumed my drive home, still feeling unnerved by what had just happened. The next day, I decided to check the car's tags, only to find out they weren't due to expire for another 2 months. While it could have been a simple mistake, the way the whole situation unfolded left me feeling uneasy. I wondered if he had misread the numbers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started to consider what could have happened if that person hadn't been a legitimate officer, or if he had bad intentions. Since that night, I've made it a rule to only pull over in well-populated areas. If I ever find myself in an isolated spot, I always call 911 first to let them know what's happening before I stop. That experience made me realize the importance of being cautious, even in situations that seem normal. A few days ago, I encountered a strange experience at the grocery store that still lingers in my mind. I was shopping with my toddler, who is just over a year old, on a weekend morning. The place was crowded, with many other families navigating the aisles, and the sounds mixed between children's laughter and the cashier's announcements. While I was picking out some fruits and vegetables, an older lady, perhaps in her 70s, approached me. She seemed kind and genuinely interested. She said, "Ma'am, just so you know, all the canned vegetables are on sale for 50 cents this week." She continued to talk about how this deal is not often available and how it would be a great idea to take advantage of it. I felt grateful for her tip, thanked her, and told her I would definitely grab some cans on my way out. As she turned to leave, she suddenly stopped, looked back, and smiled at my son. She asked me how old he was, and I replied that he was just over a year old. Then she started asking random questions about him, like whether he was my only child. Then, as if she just remembered something important, she said, "Hey, I just remembered that I have some clothes in my trunk. Boy stuff in the 2T to 3T range. Would you like them?" I felt a bit taken aback and politely declined, saying that we would be shopping for a while and I didn't want to hold her up. However, she didn't let it go easily. At that point, it really felt like she was trying to lure me and my son to her car. I kept declining and took a step back. I spent some more time shopping, trying to calm my nerves and browsing the aisles. At one point, I saw her standing in a central aisle of the store with a younger man, just watching people. Maybe I was being paranoid, and perhaps she was just a sweet old lady trying to help. But something inside me urged me to get out of that conversation as quickly as possible. As a parent, I understand that having a small child makes strangers more likely to approach you, often making small talk about your kids. But this conversation felt different from the others I had experienced while out with my son. After finishing my shopping, I couldn't shake the unease I felt. I thought about that lady and whether she was genuinely nice or if there was something more sinister going on. I sat in the car after leaving, feeling relieved to have left that experience behind. Ultimately, I wanted to share my experience with others. Perhaps someone else has had a similar encounter. I feel that every parent would understand the need to be cautious, especially when it comes to children. So, I want to urge everyone to stay vigilant and be aware of their surroundings, because the safety of your children comes first. An incident at the ski resort. When I was 10 years old, I had a terrifying experience at a ski resort. I was there with my family, which included my dad, stepmom, and 3 sisters. We had a fantastic day skiing, playing, and enjoying the snow. But after a while, my sister Ava and I started to feel really cold. So, we decided to head back to the hotel to grab some warm food. We entered the hotel restaurant and sat at a table, waiting for our stepmom to come down. We chatted and laughed about our day, enjoying the cozy atmosphere. After a while, our stepmom arrived, and we asked her if she could hold the table while we quickly ran up to our room to drop off our ski jackets. We took the elevator to our floor, and when we got off, we started walking toward our room. That's when I heard a voice behind us say, "Fed." I didn't think the voice was directed at us, so I ignored it and kept walking. But just as we reached the door, something unexpected happened. Before we could close the door, a tall man appeared in the doorway. He looked to be in his early 60s and was wearing a hotel staff uniform, but it didn't have any logos on it. The thing that really made me uneasy was that he was wearing black surgical gloves. He then said, "Hey, I was talking to you." Ava and I were caught off guard and turned around. Ava nervously asked, "Us?" To which he replied, "Yeah, you guys. I was wondering if you could take a picture for me and come into my room to pour me some water." Even at our young age, we had been taught by our parents never to trust strangers. We immediately felt a bad vibe from him, so we politely declined his request. However, his tone shifted to a slightly annoyed one as he said, "Come on, it'll only take a second. Can you please just pour me some water in my room?" At that moment, we knew something was very wrong, so we said no again. The conversation went back and forth for about 3 minutes, and he actually tried to walk into our room. Our instincts kicked in, and I quickly ran toward the door, saying, "Sir, we're good." And then I slammed the door in his face. Ava and I sat in our hotel room for about 10 minutes, panicking about how we were going to leave and talk to our parents since we had left our phones downstairs. We peered through the peephole and saw that he was gone, so we bolted down the hallway and rushed down the stairs to the restaurant. As soon as we told our stepmom what had happened, she was horrified. Without hesitation, she went to speak with security. They interviewed us and asked for a description of the man since there were no cameras in the hallway. We provided them with the description, and they informed us that no one matching that description worked there. In fact, most of the staff were young college students who were struggling to make ends meet. In that moment, the reality of our situation hit us. If we had helped that man, we could have been in serious danger. I felt the urgent need to educate everyone about stranger danger, especially for children. And to that creepy hotel guy who didn't even work there, I pray and hope we never encounter you again, as this experience left a deep mark on my memory. This is a story about someone I thought was a friend, but over time I began to discover dark aspects of his personality that made me realize he was suffering from serious psychological issues. The story is not just about why I cut ties with him, but it evolves into one of those moments where you say, I hope we never meet again. To protect privacy, I won't mention ages or locations. The story began about 4 years ago when I was living at a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was a family home where my friend, his sister, and their parents lived. About 2 weeks into my stay, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to move in with us as well. At first, he seemed like an ordinary person, even quite friendly. He was very sociable and full of interesting stories. We would often sit around the table, having drinks or talking about life while smoking in the garden. He seemed to fit into our social circle easily. However, within the first month, as he began to feel comfortable in the house, unsettling traits in his personality started to emerge. He would rant about government conspiracy theories and always portrayed himself as the victim in every situation. In addition to that, he was heavily influenced by the idea of the Sigma male and martial arts. Although these topics seemed strange, I initially thought he might just be a quirky individual. But things didn't stop there. He had a bad temper and an unstable personality. He also owned a large dog, which he kept caged at all times. This dog was known to be very aggressive whenever its owner was not around. One day, the dog attacked his girlfriend viciously, which forced her to make the tough decision to have it euthanized. After that incident, he began to impose feelings of guilt on her, and his rants became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the brilliant idea to move into a shipping container. This decision stemmed from the pressure from his parents to leave their home, and he convinced his girlfriend to move in with him. They rented a container in a storage yard on the outskirts of the city. Instead of living quietly, he started intimidating and harassing the staff there, until they eventually had to call the police. Naturally, he perceived this as another conspiracy against him. His abusive behavior toward his girlfriend escalated to the point where her family had to intervene to get her out of that toxic situation. I stayed close to them, pretending to be on his side until we could help her escape safely. Eventually, they broke up, and he blamed me, claiming I poisoned her mind against him. Fortunately, she moved on and is now in a healthy relationship with someone else. We all blocked this psychopathic ex on every platform available, but he continued to harass them until he eventually seemed to disappear. Or so we thought. A year later, I started receiving strange messages on social media from various accounts. Each time, I blocked the account, but it became clear that they were all from him. Some messages were friendly, while others were hostile. But it was evident that all the accounts belonged to the same person. One of these accounts pretended to be someone I knew from university. We chatted for several days about life and general matters, and eventually I was invited to a house party. The account claimed the house would be empty, and many people would be attending, which sounded like an enticing offer. I took time off work and arranged all the travel details. In the days leading up to the party, I continued to communicate with this friend. One day, I mentioned the party to my friend's sister, who was interested in joining me. But when I told her the address, her expression changed instantly. She panicked because the address belonged to the crazy ex's father, who had the property up for sale. Feeling extremely anxious, I called the police and claimed there was a suspected break-in at the property. When the police arrived, They found 5 people inside the house, including the ex. What was even more terrifying was what they found outside. A butcher's van parked in front of the house, equipped for food storage, and inside they discovered knives, hammers, and ropes. That moment was indescribably horrifying.